How did your dad lose his custody rights? Dad lost custody the day I turned him in for selling my seizure medication. I was 15 when the seizures started. Grand mal episodes that left me unconscious on classroom floors, thrashing in grocery store aisles, bleeding from bitten tongues. The neurologist prescribed expensive anticonvulsants that cost $400 per bottle, even with insurance. Mom worked double shifts at the diner to afford them. Dad was unemployed again, spending his days on the couch, scrolling through his phone, complaining about how unfair life was. When Mom got her second job cleaning offices at night, I barely saw her except when she'd collapse into bed at dawn, her uniform still smelling like industrial cleaner and exhaustion. The first time Dad took my pills, I thought I'd miscounted. The bottle felt lighter, but seizures mess with your memory. Maybe I'd taken more than usual during a confused state. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. Then I found him in the bathroom at 2 a.m., crushing my pills with a hammer, mixing the powder into small bags with the precision of someone who'd done this before. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. "Your mom's working herself to death for these things," he said calmly, not even pausing in his work. "Do you know what each pill is worth on the street? $40 each." I stared at him, my own father, weighing my life-saving medication like a drug dealer measuring product. The bathroom counter looked like a crime scene, white powder everywhere, my pills reduced to street drugs. "We need the money," he continued, sealing another bag. "You can skip a few doses. Nothing bad will happen. You're being dramatic about this whole seizure thing anyway." The casual way he dismissed my medical condition made my stomach turn. This was the same man who'd sat in hospital waiting rooms when I was first diagnosed, who'd researched treatment options online, who'd held my hand during the first terrifying seizure. But something bad did happen. 3 days later, I had a seizure during chemistry class that lasted 4 minutes. I woke up in an ambulance, my classmates' terrified faces burned into my memory, blood on my shirt from where I'd bitten my tongue. The paramedic asked if I'd been taking my medication as prescribed. I lied and said yes. I was too ashamed to admit my father was stealing my pills. At home, Dad was counting cash at the kitchen table, bills spread around him like he was some kind of successful businessman instead of someone who'd stolen from his sick daughter. He looked up when I walked in, bandage still on my forehead from hitting the desk. "How much did you get?" I asked quietly. "$300, he said without looking up. "Don't be so dramatic. You're fine now." That night, I heard Mom crying in their bedroom. She'd discovered the missing pills during her nightly ritual of organizing my medications. Dad convinced her I was probably forgetting doses due to post-seizure confusion. Mom believed him because she trusted her husband more than her instincts. I wanted to tell her the truth, but Mom was already working 80 hours a week. The stress of knowing Dad was stealing my medication might have killed her. She was barely hanging on as it was. So I started documenting everything, taking photos of pill counts, recording conversations with my phone hidden in my pocket, writing down every lie he told Mom about why the bottles were emptying faster than they should. The evidence was damning. Dad discussing street prices with buyers, Dad crushing pills while Mom slept, Dad lying directly to her face about my medication compliance. 2 weeks later, I had another seizure, this time in the middle of the night. I woke up on my bedroom floor, blood pooling under my head from where I'd hit the dresser. When I called out for help, Dad found me there in the morning, and his first words weren't asking if I was okay. They were, "How much medication did you take last night?" He was worried I'd overdosed and wasted his product. Not concerned about the blood, not worried about brain damage, just calculating how much money I'd cost him. That's when I knew I had to act. The next day, while Dad was out selling my pills to buy lottery tickets and beer, I called the police. Officer Rivera arrived an hour later. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen everything. I showed her everything. The photos, the recordings, the notebook where I'd tracked every seizure that happened when my medication levels dropped. She was quiet for a long time, reviewing the evidence with the expression of someone who'd seen everything but was still shocked. "This is incredibly thorough documentation," she said finally. "How long has this been happening?" 3 months that I know of, I said. Maybe longer before I figured it out. She looked at me with something between pity and admiration. "You know this means your father will be arrested? You understand the consequences?" I nodded. I also knew it meant Mom would finally understand why I'd been having breakthrough seizures despite supposedly taking my medication correctly. It meant no more lies, no more stolen pills, no more wondering if I'd wake up dead because Dad needed gambling money. When Dad came home that evening, 2 patrol cars were waiting. He saw them and actually tried to run. Made it about half a block before they tackled him in Mrs. Henderson's flower bed. She'd been watching from her window and later told me she'd never been happier to see someone destroy her petunias. They found $800 cash in his wallet and 12 bags of crushed pills in his jacket. The lab confirmed they were my exact medication, right down to the manufacturer markings. Dad had been running a pharmaceutical operation out of our bathroom, using my medical condition as his supply chain. Mom came home from her diner shift to find Dad being loaded into a police car, and me sitting on the front steps with a social worker. She knew immediately what had happened. Not the details, but the truth about why her daughter had been suffering. She dropped her purse and sat beside me, crying harder than I'd ever seen anyone cry. "I should have known," she kept saying. "I should have protected you. How did I not see this?" But Mom had been protecting me the only way she knew how, working herself into exhaustion to pay for medication that Dad had been stealing and selling. She'd been fighting a battle she didn't even know she was losing. Every extra shift, every missed meal, every sleepless night had been her attempt to keep me healthy, while Dad systematically undermined it all. The social worker, a tired-looking woman named Ms. Chen, explained that I'd need to stay with my aunt temporarily while they investigated whether Mom had known about the theft. The thought terrified me. Aunt Carol lived in a trailer park an hour away and had 3 kids of her own. She barely had resources for her own family. But when she arrived to pick me up that night, the first thing she said was, "We'll make room. Family takes care of family." Unlike Dad, she understood what family actually meant. The investigation into Mom's involvement lasted 3 weeks. During that time, I lived in a crowded trailer where the hot water ran out after 2 showers, and dinner was often macaroni and cheese with hot dogs. But Aunt Carol never made me feel like a burden. She rearranged her kids' sleeping arrangements to give me privacy. She drove me to school every day, 40 minutes each way. She sat with me during seizures and learned how to time them properly. Most importantly, she made sure I took my medication correctly. She counted pills with me every morning and every night. She set alarms on her phone to remind me of doses. She treated my medical condition like what it was, a serious health issue that required careful management. My cousin Beth, who was my age, became my closest confidant during those weeks. She'd never known anyone with epilepsy before, but she researched everything about my condition. She learned seizure first aid. She educated her friends so they wouldn't be scared if something happened at school. The difference between her reaction and Dad's was stark. Beth saw my epilepsy as something to understand and accommodate. Dad saw it as a business opportunity. Living with Aunt Carol's family opened my eyes to what normal looked like. Her husband worked construction and came home tired but never angry. He'd ask about everyone's day and actually listen to the answers. When bills came in the mail, they discussed them openly instead of hiding them. When money was tight, they made meal plans and shopped carefully instead of stealing from each other. Nobody's medication went missing. Nobody's college fund got raided for gambling money. Nobody lied about where money went or why bills weren't getting paid. It was revolutionary. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Dad's public defender, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, tried to argue that Dad was desperate, unemployed, and didn't understand the medical necessity of my pills. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 50s named Ms. Rodriguez, brought in my neurologist who explained exactly what happens when seizure patients miss doses. "Brain damage," she said simply. "Status epilepticus, potential death. This medication isn't optional. It's not pain relief or anxiety management. It prevents his daughter's brain from killing her." Dr. Patel, my neurologist, went into detail about my specific case. She explained that my seizures were particularly dangerous because they were tonic-clonic seizures that could cause me to stop breathing. She showed brain scans demonstrating the electrical storms that would rage through my mind when I missed doses. "Each missed dose increases the risk exponentially," she testified. This young woman could have died. Her father's actions were tantamount to repeatedly poisoning her. The courtroom was silent as Dr. Patel described what happens during status epilepticus, how the brain can seize for so long that it causes permanent damage or death, how each breakthrough seizure I'd experienced had put me at risk for this outcome. "Your Honor," she concluded, looking directly at the judge, "this child's father wasn't just stealing medication. He was playing Russian roulette with her life every single day." Dad's lawyer tried a different approach. He claimed Dad thought the pills were placebos, that my seizures were psychological, that he was trying to prove I didn't really need medication. The prosecutor demolished this defense by playing recordings of Dad discussing the street value of specific seizure medications with buyers. He knew exactly what he was selling and why people wanted it. Seizure medications are popular with addicts because they enhance the effects of other drugs. Dad had been supplying people who were using my medication to get higher, not to treat medical conditions. During one court session, Dad's dealer testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was a gaunt man in his 30s with track marks on his arms and the hollow look of someone deep in addiction. He explained that Dad was a regular customer who bought lottery tickets and beer with the money from selling pills. Dad would brag about having a reliable supply because his kid was epileptic. The dealer looked genuinely disgusted as he testified. "Even I don't steal from sick kids," he said. "That's a line you don't cross." The man who was buying my medication to enhance his drug highs had more moral boundaries than my own father. Another witness was Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor, who testified about seeing Dad leave the house at odd hours carrying small packages. She'd thought he was dealing drugs, but hadn't known he was stealing from his own daughter until the arrest. "I've seen a lot of things in this neighborhood," she said, "but watching a father get arrested for selling his sick child's medication was a new low." The judge, an older black woman with silver hair and piercing eyes named Judge Washington, listened to everything with visible disgust. When Dad's lawyer suggested community service and rehabilitation, she shut him down immediately. "Your client systematically stole life-saving medication from a child for months," she said. "He caused seizures that could have killed her. He lied to her mother and endangered the entire family's financial stability. This isn't addiction. This is calculated child abuse." During the trial, more details emerged about Dad's gambling problem. Bank records showed he'd been stealing money from our accounts for over a year. He'd maxed out credit cards, borrowed against Mom's car, and even stolen from my college fund that my grandparents had set up. The financial investigator testified that Dad had lost over $25,000 in gambling over 2 years. He'd been betting on sports, buying lottery tickets, and visiting casinos. The medication theft was just the latest escalation in a pattern of selfish behavior that put his gambling addiction above his family's basic needs. When confronted with evidence of the stolen college fund, Dad broke down in court. "I was going to pay it back," he sobbed. "I had a system. I was going to win it all back." Judge Washington looked at him with contempt. "You stole from a sick child and called it a system," she said. "You're not a gambler with bad luck. You're a child abuser with a convenient excuse." Dad pled guilty to child endangerment, drug trafficking, theft of controlled substances, fraud, and contributing to the delinquency of minors. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in prison and permanent loss of parental rights. During the sentencing hearing, Dad finally looked at me. "I was trying to help our family," he said, his voice cracking. "The bills were crushing us. Your mom was killing herself working. I thought I could make some quick money and everything would be better." The judge cut him off. "You were selling your child's life-saving medication for drug money and gambling funds. You documented your own criminal activity through text messages and voicemails. You watched your daughter have seizures that you directly caused and did nothing. There is no justification for that level of child abuse." Dad's face crumpled. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. The orange jumpsuit made him look like what he was, a criminal. "I never meant for her to get hurt," he whispered. "Intent is irrelevant," the judge replied. "You endangered a child's life for personal gain. You showed no remorse until you were caught. The court finds you unfit to parent and orders permanent termination of your parental rights." After Dad was led away, the prosecutor pulled me aside. "What you did took incredible courage," she said. "Most kids wouldn't have been able to make that call against their own parent. You probably saved your own life, but it didn't feel like courage. It felt like survival. It felt like the only choice I had left." With Dad gone and the investigation concluded, Mom was cleared of any wrongdoing. The social worker's report noted that Mom had been working so many hours that she was genuinely unaware of the extent of Dad's criminal activity. Her exhaustion had been weaponized against her. I moved back home to find our house transformed. Mom had thrown away everything that reminded her of Dad. His chair, his sports memorabilia, his collection of lottery tickets and scratch-offs. She'd painted over the hole he'd punched in the living room wall during an argument about money. She'd also installed new locks and a security system. Dad was in prison, but Mom wanted to make sure he could never surprise us again. Our financial situation actually improved dramatically. Mom qualified for single-parent assistance, food stamps, and reduced-cost housing. Without Dad's gambling addiction and drug purchases draining our resources, the money Mom earned stretched much further. More importantly, my medication stayed where it belonged, in the bottle, in my system, keeping my brain from short-circuiting. I haven't had a breakthrough seizure in 2 years. Mom still works hard, but now it's by choice rather than desperation. She cut back to one job and went back to school for nursing. She's saving money for my college fund instead of wondering why our grocery budget keeps disappearing. She started therapy to deal with the guilt of not recognizing what Dad was doing. Her therapist, Dr. Kim, helped her understand that Dad had been deliberately manipulating her. He'd gaslight her when she questioned missing money. He'd convince her that I was non-compliant with medication when seizures happened. He'd isolate her from friends and family who might have noticed the signs. The manipulation had been systematic and calculated. Dad would schedule his pill-crushing sessions when Mom was at work. He'd time his gambling trips for when she was sleeping. He'd create elaborate lies about my medication compliance that made Mom question her own observations. Dr. Kim explained that this was a common pattern in families with addiction and abuse. The addicted person becomes skilled at manipulation and gaslighting to hide their behavior and shift blame to others. "Your ex-husband didn't just steal medication," she told Mom during one of their sessions that I attended. "He stole your ability to trust your own instincts. That's why you didn't see what was happening." I started therapy too. Turns out being medically abused by your parent leaves some psychological scars that run deeper than the physical ones. I had nightmares about waking up seizing with no medication available. I developed anxiety around taking pills, worried they might be fake or tampered with. I had panic attacks in pharmacies, convinced that someone was watching me pick up prescriptions. My therapist, Dr. Williams, helped me understand that Dad's behavior wasn't about me. It was about his addiction to gambling and his fundamental inability to put anyone else's needs before his own wants. He would have sold anything of value for quick cash. I just happened to be carrying something valuable inside my own body. The hardest part was accepting that the father I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as a resource to exploit rather than a daughter to protect. The man who taught me to ride a bike had crushed my pills with a hammer. The man who read me bedtime stories had counted seizure medication like poker chips. Dr. Williams said grief for a living parent who becomes abusive is particularly complex. You mourn the relationship you thought you had while dealing with the trauma of the relationship you actually had. The therapy helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for Dad's choices. I wasn't responsible for his gambling addiction. I wasn't responsible for his decision to steal from me. I was only responsible for protecting myself when no one else would. That realization was both liberating and terrifying. Sometimes people ask if I feel guilty about sending my own father to prison. The answer is complicated. I feel guilty that it took so long. I feel guilty that Mom worked herself nearly to death while Dad stole from us. I feel guilty that I almost died on a classroom floor because I was too afraid to speak up sooner. But I don't feel guilty about protecting myself. I don't feel guilty about ending the cycle of abuse. I don't feel guilty about choosing my health over his gambling habit. Last month, Dad sent a letter from prison. It was the first contact I'd had from him since sentencing. The envelope was thick, suggesting a long explanation or apology. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won. He wanted to apologize and explain that he'd been addicted to gambling and had gotten in debt to dangerous people. He needed the money to pay them back, or they'd have hurt our family. He was protecting us, he claimed. Everything he did was to keep us safe from loan sharks and criminals. He painted himself as a hero who'd made a terrible sacrifice to protect his family. The letter was full of self-pity and attempts at emotional manipulation. He described prison as hell, begged for forgiveness, and promised he'd change. He claimed to have found religion and completed addiction counseling. He wanted me to visit so he could apologize in person. He also mentioned that he'd been corresponding with other family members who believed his version of events. According to Dad, I was ungrateful and vindictive for refusing to forgive him. I was tearing the family apart by maintaining the restraining order. I read the letter twice and threw it away. Even if that story was true, and I suspected it wasn't based on the timeline of his gambling habits, it didn't change what he'd done. He'd chosen to put me at risk rather than face the consequences of his own actions. He'd watched me have seizures and counted pills instead of calling 911. He'd lied to Mom's face while she worked herself to exhaustion. Protection looks like Mom working double shifts to afford medication. Protection looks like me calling the police when someone was endangering our family. Protection doesn't look like stealing a sick child's medication to pay gambling debts. Mom asked if I wanted to write back. No, I said. I'm done being his safety net. I'm done making excuses for him. I'm done pretending that addiction absolves someone of choosing to abuse their child. My seizures are controlled now with proper medication management and regular neurologist visits. I'm a senior in high school with plans to study nursing. Mom and I have dinner together every night, and she doesn't work weekends anymore. We built a good life from the ruins of a bad one. 6 months ago, I ran into Dad's sister at the grocery store. Aunt Patricia had always been his biggest defender, the one who made excuses for his behavior and blamed everyone else for his problems. She'd been visiting him in prison and wanted me to know he was sorry, really sorry this time. Not like before. He's learned his lesson, she said, cornering me in the cereal aisle. He wants to make amends when he gets out. Family is important. People deserve second chances. You're being cruel by refusing to forgive him. I looked at her for a long moment. This was the same woman who'd defended Dad when Mom first accused him of gambling away bill money. The same woman who'd said I was being dramatic about my seizures and that teenagers exaggerate everything. The same woman who'd suggested that Mom was too controlling about medication schedules. He had his chance to make amends every time he chose to steal my medication instead of getting help, I said. Every time he watched me have a seizure and said nothing. Every time he lied to Mom about where the pills were going. Every time he chose gambling over his daughter's life. She looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight and avoiding eye contact. People make mistakes when they're desperate, she said. Addiction is a disease. He wasn't thinking clearly. You should show compassion. Stealing someone's seizure medication isn't a mistake, I replied. It's a series of deliberate choices made over months. It's planned, calculated abuse. An addiction doesn't make someone steal from their sick child. Lack of moral character does that. I'm not his victim anymore, I continued. I'm not required to provide him with forgiveness or second chances or compassion. I gave him 18 months of chances while he stole from me. He used them all up. The conversation ended there. She walked away muttering about how I'd grown up to be cold and unforgiving. Maybe she was right. Maybe watching your father sell your life-saving medication for lottery tickets does make you cold. Maybe surviving medical abuse does make you unforgiving. I'm okay with that. When Dad gets out next year, he'll have no custody rights, no visitation, no legal connection to me at all. The courts made sure of that. If he tries to contact me, it's considered stalking under the restraining order I obtained during his sentencing. The restraining order was my idea. Ms. Rodriguez, the prosecutor, suggested it after Dad's letter arrived. She'd seen too many cases where abusive parents used prison time to plan their return and manipulation tactics. You don't owe him access to your life, she told me. He forfeited that when he chose to abuse you. Sometimes people tell me I'll regret cutting him off completely. That family is important and forgiveness is healing. That I should give him another chance to be a father. That everyone deserves redemption. But I've learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about protection, sacrifice, and putting each other's safety first. Mom worked 80 hours a week for my medication. I called the police to protect us both. Aunt Carol took me in without question. The prosecutor fought for justice. Dr. Williams helped me heal. Dad sold my seizure medication for gambling money. One of these things is not like the others. I'm 17 now and haven't spoken to Dad since his sentencing. I don't plan to start when he's released. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding, especially when the person who burned them down is asking you to provide the materials and labor. Mom and I are doing fine without him. Better than fine, actually. Our apartment is smaller than the house we lost, but it's peaceful. No more wondering where the money went. No more mysterious disappearances of valuable items. No more lies about why my medication wasn't working. The peace is what I treasure most. No more walking on eggshells around Dad's moods. No more watching Mom cry over missing money. No more seizures caused by stolen medication. No more wondering if I'd wake up dead because someone needed gambling funds. And my seizures? Completely controlled. Turns out, medication works much better when it stays in the bottle instead of being crushed up and sold on street corners. Who would have thought? Last week, my neurologist said I'm a candidate for eventually weaning off medication entirely. My brain has matured enough that the seizures might not return. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible. The irony isn't lost on me that I might not need the medication Dad stole just as he's getting out of prison. I told Mom the news over dinner. She cried happy tears for the first time I could remember. We did it, she said. We got through this. No, I thought. We survived this. We survived Dad's addiction, his abuse, his complete failure as a parent. We survived because we chose each other over someone who was destroying us both. That's not the same as getting through something. That's overcoming it. Next month, I start my college applications. I'm applying for pre-nursing programs with specializations in pediatric care. I want to work with kids who have medical conditions like mine. Kids whose parents might not protect them the way they should. I want to be the person who notices when medication isn't working because it's not being taken. The person who asks the right questions and doesn't accept easy answers. The person who protects children when their own families won't. Mom asked if I'm doing this because of what happened with Dad. Partly, I admitted. but mostly because I know what it feels like to be a sick kid who needs someone to believe them and fight for them. She nodded and squeezed my hand. You're going to be an amazing nurse, she said. I think she's right, not because I'm naturally gifted or destined for greatness, but because I learned early that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. And I learned that when no one else will save you, you have to save yourself. Even if it means calling the police on your own father. Especially if it means calling the police on your own father. Because your life is worth more than his gambling habit. Your health is worth more than his addiction. Your future is worth more than his excuses. That's a lesson I hope I never have to teach another kid. But if I do, I'll be ready. My college essay is about resilience and medical advocacy. I wrote about learning to fight for yourself when the people who should be fighting for you are the ones causing harm. My guidance counselor said it was the most powerful essay she'd ever read. I'm applying to schools with strong nursing programs and research opportunities in pediatric epilepsy. I want to understand my condition better and help other kids who are going through what I went through. Mom is proud, but also worried about me reliving trauma through my career choice. Are you sure you want to spend your life dealing with sick children and potentially abusive families? She asked. I'm sure, I said, because I know what it looks like when someone doesn't advocate for a sick child. I know what happens when the system fails. I want to be part of the solution. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from Ms. Rodriguez. Dad's parole hearing had been moved up due to prison overcrowding. He might get out 6 months early for good behavior. I wasn't surprised. Dad had always been charming when it served his purposes. I'm sure he'd been a model prisoner when the staff was watching. Do you want to submit a victim impact statement? She asked. I thought about it for days. Part of me wanted to tell the parole board exactly what Dad's actions had cost our family. Part of me wanted to make sure they understood the depth of his betrayal. But another part of me was done giving Dad any more of my time or energy. No, I said finally. He's already lost his parental rights. He can't hurt me anymore. I don't need to convince anyone of anything. Ms. Rodriguez understood. You've already won, she said. You survived him. You protected yourself and your mother. You don't owe him another thought. She was right. I'd already won by learning to value my own life more than his approval. I'd won by choosing safety over family loyalty. I'd won by refusing to make excuses for inexcusable behavior. Whether he got out early or served his full sentence didn't change any of that. Last month, I received an unexpected letter. Not from Dad, but from my neurologist's office. They wanted to know if I'd be interested in participating in a research study about adolescent epilepsy and family support systems. The researcher, Dr. Martinez, had read about my case through the court records that had become public during Dad's trial. She was studying how family dynamics affect treatment compliance in teenage epilepsy patients. Your case is unique, she explained during our phone conversation. Most non-compliance issues we see are due to teenagers refusing medication. We rarely see cases where parents are actively sabotaging treatment. I agreed to participate. The study involved interviews, questionnaires, and medical record reviews. Dr. Martinez was particularly interested in how I'd maintained medication compliance despite family sabotage and how the stress of the situation had affected my seizure control. The findings were striking. During the months when Dad was stealing my medication, my seizure activity had increased dramatically. But once the medication theft stopped, my seizures became completely controlled again. This suggests that your seizures were entirely preventable, Dr. Martinez explained. Your father's actions directly caused medical episodes that could have killed you. The study would be published in a medical journal and used to train healthcare providers to recognize signs of medication diversion by family members. My case would help other kids in similar situations. For the first time, something good was coming from the worst experience of my life. Dr. Martinez asked if I'd be willing to speak at medical conferences about my experience. Healthcare providers need to understand that sometimes the barrier to treatment compliance isn't the patient, she said. Sometimes it's the people who are supposed to be helping them. I agreed. If sharing my story could help one doctor recognize the signs of medication abuse, it would be worth it. My first speaking engagement is scheduled for next month at a pediatric epilepsy conference. I'll be part of a panel on treatment barriers and family dynamics. Mom is nervous about me speaking publicly about our family situation. Are you sure you want strangers knowing our business? She asked. It's not our business anymore, I said. It's medical education. It's helping other kids who might be going through the same thing. She nodded but still looked worried. I just don't want you to be defined by what happened to you. I won't be, I promised. But I can use what happened to me to help other people. That's the difference between being a victim and being a survivor. Victims are defined by what happened to them. Survivors use what happened to them to create change. Last week, I received acceptance letters from 3 nursing programs. All 3 offered scholarships specifically for students interested in pediatric care and medical advocacy. The scholarship essays had asked about my motivation for pursuing nursing. I'd written about watching my mother work herself to exhaustion for my medication, while my father sold it for gambling money. I'd written about learning that healthcare isn't just about medicine, but about protection and advocacy. The scholarship committee was impressed by what they called my passion for patient advocacy and my personal understanding of healthcare barriers. Mom cried when we opened the acceptance letters together. Your father tried to destroy your future, she said. Instead, he gave you a purpose. She was right. Dad's betrayal had taught me things I never would have learned otherwise. I understood the importance of medication compliance in ways most people never would. I knew what family betrayal looked like and how to recognize it in other families. I knew how to fight for myself when no one else would. Those weren't lessons I'd wanted to learn at 15, but they were lessons that would make me a better nurse and a stronger person. 6 months from now, I'll start college. I'll study nursing and pediatric care. I'll learn to recognize signs of abuse and neglect. I'll advocate for kids who can't advocate for themselves. And Dad? He'll be out of prison, with no legal connection to me, no access to my life, and no power to hurt me anymore. That's not a coincidence. That's justice. Because in the end, the child he tried to rob ended up with everything he tried to take away: a future, an education, a purpose, and the strength to help other people. He ended up with nothing but the consequences of his choices. Sometimes the system works exactly the way it's supposed to. 2 months ago, something unexpected happened. I was volunteering at the children's hospital when a nurse approached me. "Are you the girl from the Rodriguez case?" she asked. I was confused until she explained. She'd attended one of the training sessions where my case was discussed. She'd learned to recognize signs of medication diversion because of my story. "Last week," she said, "I noticed a pattern with one of our patients. A 12-year-old with diabetes whose blood sugar kept spiking despite supposedly taking insulin. The family insisted the child was non-compliant, but something felt off. She'd remembered the warning signs from my case and investigated further. It turned out the child's uncle was stealing and selling the insulin. The child was hospitalized 3 times because of dangerously high blood sugar levels. If I hadn't heard your story," the nurse said, "I might have believed the family's explanation. That little girl could have died. For the first time since Dad's arrest, I felt something other than anger about what had happened to me. I felt proud. My trauma had prevented someone else's trauma. My story had saved another child." Dr. Martinez was thrilled when I told her about the case. "This is exactly why we need to get your story into medical training programs," she said. "You're already saving lives." The presentation at the medical conference went better than I expected. The audience of doctors and nurses was riveted as I described the warning signs they should watch for. Unexplained breakthrough symptoms despite reported medication compliance, family members who seem overly interested in medication details, parents who answer for their children during medical appointments. During the question and answer session, several healthcare providers shared similar cases they'd encountered but hadn't recognized as medication diversion. One pediatric oncologist described a case where a child's cancer treatment wasn't working as expected. The family blamed the child for forgetting doses, but it later emerged that the father was selling the expensive chemotherapy drugs. A diabetes educator mentioned a teenager whose insulin levels never seemed right, despite the family's insistence that she was taking her medication correctly. They'd focused on diabetes education instead of investigating potential theft. After my presentation, I was approached by representatives from 3 medical schools who wanted to include my case in their curriculum. The American Academy of Pediatrics asked permission to use my story in their training materials. My nightmare was becoming a teaching tool that could prevent other children from experiencing what I'd gone through. Mom attended the conference with me. Afterward, she was quiet for a long time. "I never imagined that what happened to us could help other people," she said finally. "Neither did I admitted. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the worst things that happen to us can become the most important things we do for others." A month after the conference, I received a letter from the National Epilepsy Foundation. They wanted me to serve on their advisory board for patient advocacy. At 17, I'd be the youngest member in the organization's history. The foundation's letter explained that they needed young voices to help shape policies around medication access and family dynamics in chronic illness management. My experience had given me insights that could inform their advocacy work. I accepted the position immediately. The first board meeting was intimidating. I sat in a conference room with doctors, researchers, and policy experts who'd been working in epilepsy advocacy for decades. But when they asked for my input on a proposed bill about medication monitoring, I realized I had something valuable to contribute. The bill focused on preventing medication abuse by requiring pharmacies to track prescription patterns, but it didn't address family-level theft, which wouldn't show up in pharmacy records. We need to include provisions for healthcare providers to recognize and report suspected medication diversion by family members, I suggested. And we need protections for children who report this abuse. The room went quiet. Then Dr. Hendricks, a prominent epileptologist, nodded slowly. "That's a blind spot we hadn't considered," he said. "How do we write that into legislation?" Over the next 2 hours, we drafted amendments that would require medical training on medication diversion recognition and create legal protections for minors who report medication theft by family members. 6 months later, the bill passed with our amendments included. It became known as the Medication Protection Act, though privately I thought of it as the Dad Can't Steal My Pills Anymore Act. The law requires healthcare providers to receive training on recognizing signs of medication diversion. It creates legal immunity for medical professionals who report suspected theft. Most importantly, it establishes emergency protocols for protecting children whose families are stealing their medication. If a law like this had existed when I was 15, maybe a nurse or doctor would have recognized what was happening sooner. Maybe other kids wouldn't have to document their own abuse for months before anyone believed them. High school graduation arrived faster than I expected. I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, knowing that Dad should have been in the audience but wasn't. Mom cheered loudly enough for both parents. After the ceremony, my principal pulled me aside. "I've been doing this for 30 years, she said. I've never had a student overcome what you've overcome and still graduate with honors. You should be proud." I was proud, not just of my grades, but of surviving, of protecting myself and Mom, of turning our worst experience into something that could help other people. College started 3 weeks later. I chose a school 4 hours away, far enough that Dad couldn't show up unexpectedly when he got out of prison, but close enough that I could visit Mom regularly. My roommate was a pre-med student named Alex, who'd grown up in a stable family and couldn't imagine parents hurting their children. When I told her my story, she was shocked. "How are you not more messed up?" she asked. The question made me laugh. "Who says I'm not messed up?" I said. "I just channel it productively." Alex became one of my closest friends. She helped me with organic chemistry, and I helped her understand the social determinants of health. We made a good team. During my second semester, I got a call from Ms. Rodriguez. Dad was being released early for good behavior. He'd served 3 years of his 4-year sentence. The restraining order is still in effect, she reminded me. If he contacts you, call police immediately. I wasn't worried. Dad had no legal claim to me anymore. No custody rights, no visitation, no say in my life. He was a stranger now, and strangers couldn't hurt me the way family could. 2 weeks after his release, I got a text from an unknown number. I know I messed up. I just want to talk. I'm different now. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Ms. Rodriguez. She filed a restraining order violation report within an hour. Dad spent 3 days back in jail for the text message. When he got out, his parole officer made it clear that any further contact with me would result in returning to prison for the remainder of his original sentence. The message stopped. Mom asked if I was okay after the incident. I'm fine, I said, and meant it. He can't hurt me anymore. He's just a man who used to live in our house. That's exactly right, she said. He used to be your father. Now he's just someone who shares your DNA. During my junior year of nursing school, I specialized in pediatric emergency care. I learned to recognize signs of abuse, neglect, and medical maltreatment. I learned how to ask children the right questions and how to document concerning findings. Most importantly, I learned how to be the adult I'd needed when I was 15. My clinical rotation in the pediatric ER was eye-opening. I saw children whose parents brought them in for help, and children whose parents brought them in to cover up harm. I learned to tell the difference. One night, a 14-year-old boy came in with severe dehydration. His parents said he'd been refusing to drink water or take his medication for diabetes. They seemed frustrated and helpless, but something felt familiar about the case. The boy's eyes reminded me of my own reflection during the months when Dad was stealing my pills. Defeated, exhausted, hopeless. I asked to speak with him privately. Are you taking your insulin as prescribed? I asked. He nodded quickly. Too quickly. Where do you keep your insulin? In the kitchen, he said. My mom counts it every day to make sure I'm taking it. That was a red flag. Why would a parent need to count insulin if their child was taking it correctly? I asked more questions. The boy's answers became increasingly inconsistent. Finally, I asked the question directly. Is someone taking your insulin? He broke down and told me everything. His older brother was stealing and selling the insulin to buy drugs. The family knew but blamed the diabetic child for being non-compliant, rather than confronting the theft. The boy had been hospitalized 4 times in 6 months for diabetic ketoacidosis. Each time, the family blamed him for not managing his condition properly. I immediately called social services and security. The boy was placed in protective custody while the theft was investigated. His brother was arrested for medication diversion and child endangerment. After the case was resolved, my supervisor called me into her office. How did you know to ask those questions? She asked. I told her about my own experience with medication theft. She listened with growing amazement. You probably saved that boy's life, she said. We'd been treating him for non-compliance for months. We never suspected family theft. That case led to a policy change at the hospital. Now all cases of repeated medication non-compliance in pediatric patients trigger an automatic social work consultation to screen for family-level medication diversion. My story was becoming a blueprint for protecting other children. I graduated nursing school summa cum laude and was accepted into a pediatric nurse practitioner program. My thesis focused on developing screening tools to identify medication theft in families with chronic childhood illnesses. The research was funded by a grant from the National Institutes of Health. The study results showed that medication diversion by family members was far more common than previously recognized, affecting approximately 8% of children with chronic conditions requiring expensive medications. The screening tool I developed is now used in pediatric clinics across the country. It's a simple questionnaire that asks about medication storage, family financial stress, and whether children ever feel unsafe discussing their medication compliance with their parents. Early identification has prevented hundreds of cases of medical child abuse. Mom came to my graduate school graduation. As I walked across the stage to receive my degree, she stood up and cheered. Afterward, she hugged me tightly. Your father tried to destroy you, she said. Instead, you became someone who protects other children from fathers like him. That night, we went to dinner to celebrate. Over dessert, Mom told me something I'd never known. I've been writing to other mothers whose children experienced medical abuse, she said, sharing our story, helping them understand that it's not their fault when they don't recognize what's happening. I smiled. We'd both found ways to turn our trauma into something useful. 2 years after graduating, I was promoted to lead pediatric nurse practitioner at a major children's hospital. My job involves not just treating sick children, but identifying when families are contributing to their illness. Last month, I testified before Congress about the need for stronger laws protecting children from medication theft. The hearing was broadcast on C-SPAN, and I received hundreds of emails from families who'd experienced similar situations. One letter stood out. It was from a 16-year-old girl whose stepfather had been stealing her seizure medication. She'd seen my testimony and realized she wasn't alone. I'm documenting everything now, she wrote. Taking pictures and recordings just like you did. I know what I have to do. I called her immediately and walked her through the process of reporting the theft safely. Within a week, her stepfather was arrested and she was placed with relatives who properly managed her medication. Her seizures stopped immediately once the medication theft ended. She sent me a thank you card a month later. You saved my life by sharing your story, but she'd saved her own life by having the courage to act on it. That's the difference between being a victim and being a survivor. Victims endure what happens to them. Survivors use what happened to them to prevent it from happening to others. I never heard from Dad again after that single text message 4 years ago. According to public records, he's working at a gas station and living in a studio apartment across the state. He remarried someone he met through a gambling addiction support group. I hope he's genuinely changed, not for his sake, but for his new wife's sake, and for the sake of any children who might come into their lives. But his redemption isn't my responsibility. My responsibility was to protect myself and help other children do the same. I succeeded. Sometimes people ask if I ever think about reconciling with Dad. The answer is simple. There's nothing to reconcile. The father I loved died when he chose gambling over my life. The man who exists now is someone I never met. I don't hate him anymore. Hate requires emotional investment, and I've invested my emotions elsewhere. In my patience, in my research, in preventing other children from experiencing what I experienced. That's a much better use of my energy than forgiving someone who chose to steal my medication and watch me suffer for months. 5 years after Dad went to prison, I published a book about my experience. Stolen Pills. A nurse's journey from medical abuse to child advocacy became required reading in several medical schools and social work programs. The book tour was surreal. I spoke to audiences of healthcare providers, social workers, and parents about recognizing and preventing medication theft in families. People often asked how I'd found the strength to report my own father. The strength didn't come from somewhere special inside me, I'd explain. It came from understanding that my life was worth more than his gambling habit, that my health mattered more than keeping family secrets, that protecting myself was more important than protecting his reputation. Those aren't extraordinary realizations. They're basic survival instincts that every child should be allowed to have. Last week, I received a letter that made everything worthwhile. It was from a pediatric resident who'd read my book during her training. Dr. Thompson, she wrote, I wanted you to know that your story helped me save a child's life today. She described a case remarkably similar to mine, a teenager with epilepsy whose seizures weren't controlled despite reported medication compliance. Instead of assuming non-compliance, the resident had used my screening questions and discovered that the child's uncle was stealing and selling the seizure medication. The child is now in foster care with relatives who properly manage her medication. Her seizures are completely controlled. Without your book, the resident continued, I would have focused on medication education instead of investigating theft. This girl could have died. I cried when I read that letter. Happy tears, like Mom had cried when I told her about my college acceptances. Because in the end, that's what survival looks like. Not just escaping the person who tried to hurt you, but using that experience to prevent them from hurting other people. Dad tried to steal my future along with my medication. Instead, he gave me a purpose. Protecting children whose families see them as resources to exploit, rather than people to protect. I couldn't have chosen a better career or a more meaningful life, and I never would have found it without learning that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you are the ones you need to save yourself from. That's a hard lesson, but it's a necessary one, because your life is always worth fighting for, even when you have to fight the people who gave it to you.